Hey, welcome back. In today's episode, I'm going to give you some rather interesting developments that we are seeing in the real world assets tokenization space, the famous RWAs, that I need to bring to your attention because an awful lot of traction that we are seeing into the mainstream. So let's start off with this first interesting tweet that I've come across from X platform. Now it talks about what are the major trends that we are seeing for the remainder of this year 2025 in terms of real world assets tokenization, in terms of its rate of adoption. And the first chart that you can see here is around the denominated fiat-backed stablecoins is indeed growing much more in terms of trading volume, in terms of book orders being committed into these fiat-backed stablecoins. You can see ever since January 2024 last year, it started out in a very buoyant fashion, $100 billion market cap. But as April 2025, which is only incidentally a couple of months ago, we've seen that it's actually doubled in market cap to almost $210 billion. And it's set to grow. And I'll explain why we're going to see this trend growing in the months and years to come. So the total market cap has in effect hit the $225 billion threshold, up $97 billion year on year. The USDT, which is Tether, and USDC, which is Circle, these are two private issuing firms holding and issuing out these stablecoins backed by the US dollar, has in effect seen the majority of the charge, adding nearly $100 billion combined between them. There's other new challengers, new entrants, if you like, new kids to the block that are moving into this space, namely Athena, which is USDT-TB, and the USD0 have actually entered into the top 10 fast list. Giving a little bit more information about these new two entrants. Now the USDTB, which is Athena, this is like backed by high quality, short duration treasury assets. So think about those 1, 2 or 3 months US Treasury bills, right? Including the likes of BlackRock's BUIDL, which is the first tokenized fund to be brought onto the Ethereum network. Well, that is what is meant by this USDTP. So think of it like a short-term issuer, high quality backed short duration treasury assets, typically 1 to 2, 3 months ranges, which in effect has its needs, which justifies why they've actually come into the market. And the second one, USD0, is another stablecoin which is fully backed on a 1-to-1 ratio by real world assets like US Treasury bills. So these two new entrants, if you like, and new kids in the block, what they're trying to do is to be able to satisfy that short-term nature or that short-term need for liquidity into the digital currency payment rail systems, which is stablecoins. Not to be confused with the predominant stable-backed fiat currency, which is the Tether, USDT, and Circle, which is USDC. So this is rather interesting that we are seeing that this trend is set to continue since it's been started out in January 24 to April 25 is actually more than 2x its size of market cap, and it's set to continue. Another interesting chart here, which is Tokenized Treasury, which is another segment, another important segment in real world assets tokenization. You can see that according to this chart, it actually grew a whopping 544.8% in a year, hitting almost $6 billion by April this year. The BlackRock's BUIDL, which is the first issued tokenized fund from the world's largest asset manager, dominates that 2.5 total value lock, which is the equivalent of TradeFi's market capitalization. It is the amount of capital that's actually been invested into the blockchain. That is what is meant by TVL, total value locked into the blockchain. Ethereum still leads, but Stellar's making moves. So this is rather interesting because why we are seeing tokenized treasuries a popular theme in the RWA space, because as we all know, governments need to service the debt. They have country initiatives, country-wide initiatives that they need to be able to finance. And the ultimate vehicle that is available to them is to issue debt into the global markets. And since blockchain is decentralized and provides that quick market to liquidity access more than the TradeFi system, if I may say so, because it's operating 24/7, that alone is a huge milestone achievement over the TradeFi system. Well, in order to service those debts from governments, they need to be able to issue more government bonds in order to capture bond investors' capital to be able to service their growing debt. And given that they are print more money, we're going to be seeing more needs of tokenized treasuries onto the blockchain system, because as I said before, they operate at a more accessible rate, 24/7. It's truly a global market. That's what the blockchain provides over and above TradeFi, which is pretty much jurisdiction by jurisdiction. This is an additional benefit that these tokenized treasuries provide to those digital investors. And for me, tokenized treasuries is going to be the predominant, most important segment within the RWAs, in my own humble opinion. So investing into these tokenized treasuries, for those that are like the traditional bond investors, where they want to be able to provide liquidity in the market under a 24/7, well, perhaps they ought to look into tokenized treasuries like Undo Finance, which is the leader in the space. And you have the BlackRock's BUIDL, which is the predominant tokenized treasury funds on the real-world assets tokenization space on the blockchain. And as I said here, Ethereum still leads the pack, but we are going to be seeing more competitors, more healthy competition brought into this space, because RWAs is going to grow significantly over the medium to long term. So rather interesting trend there. And also looking into the commodities tokenized space, again, another important area, because we're talking about those precious metal commodities like gold. Also, they want to get themselves involved into the real world asset tokenization space. So by tokenizing gold-backed tokens, you're in effect rejuvenating more accessibility into the gold underlying. So I think PAXG is, as it says here, is the leader. It operates and controls almost 84% of the precious metals market in the RWA space. PAXG, which was the first issued tokenized gold on the blockchain, right? So another interesting area, but like I said, these tokens still face the same problem in that they are backed using an underlying reserve asset. So in the case of PAXG, there is still that underlying relationship between the PAXG as a tokenized token with the actual underlying gold reserves underneath. And like I said, the issue of counterparty risk still remains, which is all the more reason why I want to alert this to the investors, because even though the reason behind tokenizing precious metals and gold is not different, is to be able to bring more liquidity into the market under a 24/7 to 365 days in a year. That's the only reason why. But like I said, investors need to be wary about this counterparty risk, which is actually pegged to these tokenized gold tokens on the blockchain. There is still a risk, right? So just to bring it to your attention, but it's good to see that there is other segments, there are other use cases in tokenizing TradeFi, tokenizing fiat wealth onto the blockchain, which is precisely what real world assets tokenizations aims to achieve. So interesting trend there. And this brings me to my last trend that I've seen is, we've talked about the government debt like tokenized treasury bills on the blockchain, but there is the other side of the coin, in fact a much more interesting market, which is around private credit. So tokenizing those loans, private credit loans on chain, on the actual blockchain network. And you can see that this last trend explains that on-chain private credit is rebounding. Active loans have seen almost $500 million, which is still down from the original peak of $1.6 billion. But there's other financial operators who are leading into this private credit tokenization space. Well, incidentally, Maple Finance leads 374 out of the 550 million TVL market on tokenized private credit on the blockchain. It covers almost 2/3 of the market. So again, as with tokenized treasury bills, tokenized private credit to pick up speed, even though it has seen kind of a V-shaped recovery, which is where it's at the moment. So I wouldn't be at all surprised to see more private credit issuing firms to be involved. So need to watch this space. I also want to talk about XRP tokenization, because for me this is a type of digital security, not a digital currency mind you, but a digital security, because it's like a bridge asset. I made a video about what is XRP, which is all the more reason why you ought to subscribe to my channel and feast your eyes on those videos in order to learn more. So for me, XRP is like the plumbing infrastructure that aims to bridge the TradeFi infrastructure, financial infrastructure, onto the blockchain in order to draw in more capital, in order to see that transfer of wealth from TradeFi, from fiat, onto the blockchain, into the digital economy at large. So for me, XRP is like that enabler bridging system. So we're going to be seeing an awful lot more traction of XRP. And in fact, again, I made a video about this, that if you recall the original executive order which President Trump has signed earlier this year, he's made an announcement of 4 major digital assets to be part of this US strategic reserve: Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, and XRP. So why am I bringing this to your attention? Because ever since Trump has made that executive order announcement, that is the ultimate signal that they're not going to be relinquishing any of those 4 strategic reserve digital assets in its strategic reserve in the US. So basically, they're going to be finding budget neutral ways to invest into these strategic dominated reserve assets. It's like Bitcoin, XRP, Ethereum, and Solana are the go-to tokens in terms of perhaps investing part of your portfolio onto those tokens, because they're going to be adding more capital in the medium to long term. That's my expectation. So they're not going to sell any of those. That is an important statement. Idea behind establishing a strategic reserve for these digital assets. But he also mentioned there is a stockpile. So there is the rest of the tokens where the US marshals have confiscated originally through criminal activities and seizures and all the rest of it. Well, those are going to be subjected to liquidation, and I wouldn't be surprised by selling those stockpile crypto assets, reinvesting that into any one of these 4, if not all 4 of these US strategic digital assets, principally Bitcoin. But I wouldn't be surprised if Trump and his crypto czar team are going to be suggesting to also spread the egg into some of the smaller tokens mentioned here. So XRP is here to stay, and for that reason I don't think you can do anything wrong but to perhaps invest a proportionate amount of your wealth into XRP even. But you need to do that homework, you need to do that research, as well as reviewing some of my videos which explains the value proposition use case behind XRP. What is XRP? What is it for? What is the investment appeal and attraction to investing into a token like this, which is gaining more prominence and traction from TradeFi for the reasons I've just mentioned. So watch this space, and I will touch on this XRP token, no doubt at all, in future episodes of mine. This article here on Trump declaration, where he calls that blockchain is a society shaping technology. If you recall, he has a lot of plans to position the US as a leader in AI and in crypto, Bitcoin, crypto, DeFi projects, in order to attract and establish fintech players in the country, and lowering the taxation in order to return that incentive for investing into the country for these fintech players to settle in the US, in order to help spearhead the US leadership in AI and crypto. So making this declaration directly from the horse's mouth, as it were, from Trump, again, should be taken as tremendous signal, bullish signal, that the crypto asset industry is going to be seeing gold rush moment, a golden era of prosperity and innovation. And this leads into another interesting article here. It's expected that blockchain consulting is set to explode for all the reasons I've mentioned earlier on, and why they see that they're going to forecast a whopping $73 billion market cap in blockchain consultancy by 2033. Now, I have made in a couple of other videos in my channel some other predictions from strategy consulting firms, from the likes of Boston Consulting Group, even McKinsey's, where between them they've actually given a whopping $10 trillion market cap of real assets industry by 2030. It's huge. We're talking about trillions upon trillions of dollars worth of real asset tokenization alone. So this $73 billion blockchain consultancy estimate by 2033 is rather small and rather conservative. So I think it's going to be much more than that. And why am I bringing it to your attention, to you digital assets investors? It's not just for yourselves, but more importantly, I'm thinking more on the next generation, who are going to be those blockchain consultants. So if you have any kids or baby boomers out there or Gen Xers out there watching in my channel and who have inadvertently subscribed to it to learn more, because between these two, in my view, these are the major disruptive growth economies, growth engines that's going to set the world on fire, is really, you can't go wrong, right? Because with everything I've been explaining so far in my channel, including today's video, should give you that ultimate bullish signal that our children should be indeed studying, they should be indeed specializing their talent and wealth into becoming that next generation consultants of blockchain technology, real assets tokenization, and certainly artificial intelligence, AI. So that is the point of this article. We need to encourage them to start focusing their eyes and talent in these growth engine industries. And another important article which follows what I just said from the previous article, we are seeing this synergy, this symbiotic relationship between blockchain and AI, because as it says here, blockchain is decentralized, whereas AI at the moment is centralized. So we all know that ChatGPT is owned by OpenAI. We have Google, they have their own AI models, and similarly Amazon. Between them, they have their own AI models, which, being security firms, they are a centralized counterparty, right? Firms. That is a problem that we are faced with AI. But if you kind of bring the two together, you're going to be creating a decentralized AI industry where we're going to be seeing autonomous agents. They're calling it intelligent agents, but for me, these are autonomous AI agents that are going to be sitting and transacting over the blockchain and be involved in perhaps making decisions and also moving money, so be able to settle and make transactions on the blockchain on our behalf, to be able to trade overnight when we're asleep, right? Negotiate, even analyzing data in real time and blockchain, and also help execute strategies. These are just some of the use cases where we can deploy, establish and deploy these AI intelligent agents to be able to work closely and to be able to transact and settle transactions on the blockchain based on these growing number of use cases potentials that I just mentioned here, which, as I said before, we need to encourage our children, those Gen Zs and future generations after them, that they ought to specialize their talent and wealth in AI and in blockchain, because between them, they're going to be creating this mega disruptive technology that is going to be bigger than what we've seen in the 1990s on the internet. Well, this is going to be much more disruptive in my view. So creating this decentralized AI economy is going to be something that will paint a much more powerful narrative by plugging these two major disruptive megatrend technologies together to provide a good to society at large. And really, that's all I like to share with you today. I've talked an awful lot about these mega trends that we're seeing with RWAs, but also decentralized AI. So hopefully you enjoyed today's episode. If you have, please don't forget to hit the like button, to subscribe to my channel, because I regularly publish some interesting videos such as these, anything to do with Bitcoin, blockchain technology, and the future of finance. So till next time.